Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts or story in the comments, and subscribe to our latest stories. Before I start, tell me where you are watching me from. I wonder which cities and towns will join me in this memory that will follow me for years. He took me to Paris. Just saying those words still feels unreal, like I'm describing someone else's life. But it happened, it really did. It all began on one of those grey mornings when I'd almost stopped believing anything unexpected could happen to me. I was sitting at my kitchen table, the smell of coffee filling the room, scrolling through old photos on my phone, pictures of a life that felt smaller than I wanted it to be. That's when his message came through. Would you ever go to Paris with me? At first, I thought he was joking. He had that kind of sense of humor, gentle but unpredictable, like he knew how to make the world tilt just enough to make me forget the heaviness of it. We'd known each other for years, mostly through work. He was kind, respectful, the type of man who listened more than he spoke. I never imagined he'd ask something like that. I remember staring at the screen, trying to understand if it was just a fantasy he wanted to share, or an invitation he truly meant. I typed and erased my reply 3 times before finally sending, "If you're serious, then yes." A week later, I was standing in an airport terminal with a suitcase that suddenly felt too small for everything I was feeling. He looked different outside the context of the office, relaxed, wearing a simple jacket and a scarf that made him look like someone who belonged in old photographs. When he saw me, he smiled in that quiet, knowing way that made my stomach flutter. Though I tried to play it cool, the flight was long but easy. We talked about ordinary things, the movies we liked, the food we missed from childhood, the dreams we never spoke of out loud. Every word felt comfortable, as if we'd been having that conversation for years. At some point, he fell asleep beside me, his head turned toward the window, and I remember watching the faint reflection of clouds drift across his face. It felt safe when we landed. The Paris air was colder than I expected, sharp but sweet, with that faint smell of rain and city lights. The taxi ride from the airport was quiet. We passed rows of golden buildings, cafes with people sitting outside even in the chill, and the kind of light that makes everything seem like it's glowing from within. Our hotel was small but charming, tucked away in one of those narrow streets that always seem to hum with hidden life. The window in my room looked out over rooftops the color of ash and morning fog. I remember standing there, still in my coat, trying to believe that this was real, that I, a woman who hadn't taken a real break in years, was in Paris with someone who made me feel seen. That first evening, we walked without a plan. He said he wanted me to see Paris the way it should be seen, slowly, without a schedule. We passed a bookshop that smelled of old paper, a bakery where the scent of fresh bread followed us down the street, and a couple dancing near the Seine as if the world belonged only to them. I laughed at something small he said, I can't even remember what, but he looked at me in a way that made the sound of that laugh feel sacred. Later, we sat at a small cafe near the river. The waiter brought us coffee and croissants, and the sound of street musicians floated through the air. We didn't talk much then. Sometimes silence can say more than words ever could. At one point, he leaned forward slightly and said, "You always look like you're trying to hold the whole world together." I didn't know what to say. Maybe because it was true. I'd spent so many years being strong for everyone, for my children, for my work, for people who never noticed the weight I carried. Hearing him say that, softly, without judgment, broke something open inside me. We walked back to the hotel under a sky full of stars, the kind that seem brighter when you're far from home. When we reached the steps, I stopped. The city around us was alive, laughter, car horns, music echoing from somewhere unseen, and yet, in that moment, it felt like everything had gone quiet. "I don't know what this trip means yet," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He smiled, that same calm, patient smile, and replied, "Then let's not name it. Let's just live it." And that's what we did. We didn't rush. We didn't plan. We simply lived each moment as it came. I went to sleep that night with the window cracked open, listening to the hum of Paris below and the steady rhythm of my own heartbeat, softer now, lighter somehow. Maybe that's when I began to understand that life doesn't always give us grand beginnings. Sometimes it offers a quiet invitation, one that asks nothing more than for us to say yes. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long while, That uncertainty felt like freedom. The next morning, Paris woke me before the alarm did. The sound of street vendors setting up their carts, the smell of freshly baked bread drifting in from somewhere nearby, it was all so alive, so close, that I couldn't stay in bed any longer. I opened the window and just stood there for a while, breathing in the city. The rooftops glowed pale gold under the early light, and the cool air brushed against my face like a quiet promise that something was about to change. He knocked on my door not long after. Ready to see the real Paris, he asked with that half-smile that always seemed to hold a secret. I grabbed my coat and scarf, and we stepped outside into the morning chill. We didn't go to the usual places at first, no Eiffel Tower, no big museums. He said he wanted to show me his Paris, the one that tourists rarely noticed. So we walked through quiet streets lined with small shops, where the owners greeted him as if they'd known him for years. He told me stories as we went about the man who sold flowers on the corner, about the painter who lived above the bakery and used to trade his work for coffee and croissants. At one point, we stopped at a park where children were chasing pigeons and an old man played the accordion under a chestnut tree. The sound was faint but beautiful, like a song that had been playing long before we arrived. I sat on a bench, and he joined me, his coat brushing against mine. "You ever think," I said quietly, "that sometimes life forgets to be beautiful? And then suddenly, something reminds you it still can be?" He nodded. "That's why I brought you here." There was no grand gesture in his voice, no romance, no pressure. Just calm sincerity. It made me realize how rare it was for someone to simply see you without expecting anything in return. We walked for hours, stopping at little cafes along the way. I tried macarons for the first time, lemon and pistachio, and he laughed when I closed my eyes after the first bite. "It's the small things," he said. "That's where the world hides its magic." By the afternoon, we reached Montmartre. The streets there wound like ribbons up the hill, and every turn revealed another view that took my breath away. Artists painted portraits on the sidewalks, lovers held hands, whispering things I couldn't understand but somehow felt anyway. When we finally reached the top, the city stretched beneath us like a painting, rooftops, bridges, 1,000 little windows catching the light. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. He stood beside me, and for a long time, we just looked out together. "I used to think happiness was something you had to chase," I said after a while. "Now I think maybe it's just something you notice when you stop running long enough to see it." He turned to me then, his expression soft. "Then notice this," he said. "Right now. Remember what it feels like." That evening, we sat outside a small restaurant lit only by candles and the soft glow of the street lamps. The waiter brought wine, and for the first time in years, I let myself relax completely. The conversation drifted from our childhood dreams to the strange way time moves faster the older you get. And then he said something that stayed with me. "Do you know what I admire about you?" he asked. "You keep walking forward, even when you don't know where the road leads." It wasn't meant as flattery. It was an observation, simple and honest, and it hit deeper than I expected. I looked down at my glass, feeling something in me shift. When we walked back to the hotel later, the city was quiet again. The rain had started, soft, steady, almost shy. We didn't hurry. We just let it fall on us, our footsteps echoing through the narrow streets. At the entrance, he held the door open for me, and for a moment, we both hesitated, not because we didn't know what to say, but because there was nothing that needed to be said. "Tomorrow," he said, "we'll go somewhere I think you'll love." "Where?" I asked. "You'll see. Paris still has a few surprises for you." I went to sleep that night with my hair still damp from the rain, the city's hum fading softly through the walls. I didn't dream about anything in particular, but when I woke, I realized I'd begun to feel something I hadn't felt in years: hope. The morning came with a soft drizzle that made the streets glisten as if they were sprinkled with tiny stars. I pulled on my coat, zipped it up to my chin, and stepped out into the cool air. He was waiting, leaning casually against a lamppost, scarf wrapped loosely around his neck. When he saw me, his eyes lit up, and I felt that familiar flutter in my chest, the one that reminded me I wasn't just walking through Paris, I was living it. "Ready for a surprise?" he asked, his voice low and calm. I nodded, trying to hide my curiosity, though it was failing miserably. He took my hand gently, nothing romantic, just steady, grounding, and led me down narrow cobblestone streets that twisted like they had a story of their own. We reached a small cafe tucked away in a corner I would have never noticed. The sign above the door was faded, almost hidden, and inside, the smell of fresh pastries mingled with the rich aroma of coffee. The place was warm, cozy, and crowded with locals rather than tourists. He smiled and whispered, "This is where I come when I need to think. I wanted you to see it." We found a small table near the window. Outside, the rain tapped a soft rhythm against the glass, and inside, there was laughter, conversation, and the clinking of cups. He ordered 2 coffees and a few pastries, insisting I try them all. I laughed as I reached for a flaky chocolate croissant, breaking it apart to share with him. The way he savored the first bite, closing his eyes briefly, made me realize how rare it was to truly appreciate the little moments. After breakfast, we wandered through a neighborhood that felt like it had frozen in time. Tiny shops lined the streets, selling everything from hand-painted ceramics to delicate scarves. I watched him interact with the shopkeepers, the way he remembered their names, the way they greeted him warmly. It wasn't about charm, it was about genuine connection, and I found myself wanting to be a part of it. As the day unfolded, we discovered quiet gardens hidden behind wrought iron gates, fountains that gurgled softly, and small art galleries where paintings whispered stories from another era. At one gallery, he paused in front of a painting of a woman sitting by a window, light spilling across her face in golden streaks. "She reminds me of someone," he said softly, and I felt heat rise to my cheeks, though I wasn't sure why. He didn't elaborate, and that was enough. The mystery lingered between us, like an unspoken invitation to feel, to imagine, to wonder. We stopped for lunch at a tiny bistro, the kind where the menu changes daily and the chef greets every guest personally. We shared a salad with roasted vegetables and warm bread, and for the first time in months, I felt completely untethered from the routines that usually defined my days. He asked about my life, not in a casual, polite way, but in a way that suggested he genuinely wanted to understand the shape of my experiences, the texture of my thoughts. In the late afternoon, we found ourselves near the Seine. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets wet and reflective, like mirrors that caught the city's soul. We walked slowly, side by side, neither of us speaking much. Sometimes silence is the most honest companion. At one point, he stopped and pointed toward a small bridge where a group of musicians played softly. I leaned on the railing, watching the water flow beneath us, the reflections of old buildings rippling in its currents. "Do you ever think about what you might have missed by being careful?" he asked suddenly. I didn't answer immediately. The question hung in the air, teasing something inside me. "I've spent a lot of my life making safe choices," I admitted finally. "I suppose I never realized that being safe doesn't always mean being happy." He nodded, understanding more in that moment than anyone had for years. "Then maybe it's time to start noticing the moments that matter," he said. As dusk fell, the city transformed again. Lights flickered on, casting long shadows and painting golden trails across the streets. We wandered through a market that had sprung to life with night vendors, the smell of roasted chestnuts and spices filling the air. I felt my heart expand with a quiet joy I hadn't known was possible, a mix of wonder, gratitude, and something deeper I couldn't quite name. When we returned to the hotel that night, I paused in the doorway, looking out over the rooftops that seemed to pulse with the life of the city. He stood silently behind me, and I felt the weight of the day settle gently, like a soft blanket. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" he asked, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I am," I said honestly. "More than I expected." And in that moment, I realized that Paris was not just a city I was visiting. It was a mirror showing me the beauty of the world and, more importantly, the beauty that still existed within myself. That night, as I lay in bed, I traced the shapes of the rooftops with my eyes, remembering the laughter, the quiet streets, the music, and the rain. I thought about how rare it was to feel completely alive in someone else's company, to be both seen and understood, and I knew that this trip, this unplanned adventure, was only the beginning of something that would stay with me for years to come. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the curtains in golden slats, and I woke to the sound of Paris stirring outside. He was already up, standing by the window with a cup of coffee in hand, looking out over the city as if he were part of it. I watched him for a moment, the quiet confidence in his posture, the ease with which he seemed to belong here, and I felt an unexpected warmth that spread through me. "Good morning," he said, turning to smile. There was no need for anything more. The words themselves carried a weight of kindness and understanding. We dressed quickly and left the hotel, this time heading toward an area he had called a hidden treasure the day before. The streets were narrower than the usual tourist routes, cobbled and worn, lined with buildings that seemed untouched by time. Little cafes and antique shops peeked out from corners, and the smell of fresh bread mingled with flowers from nearby windowsills. We came to a small, sunlit courtyard where an old fountain murmured quietly in the center. He guided me to a bench, and we sat for a moment, letting the sound of the water and the gentle chatter of locals wash over us. It was peaceful, the kind of peace that feels rare in a life filled with obligations and routines. "I thought you might like this," he said softly, and I realized that every step of this trip had been carefully chosen, not for spectacle, but for connection. He wanted me to see Paris through his eyes, and in doing so, he invited me to see myself differently too. We wandered through a market that overflowed with colors and textures. Piles of fresh fruit, wheels of cheese, bouquets of flowers, every stall was a small universe of scents and sights. He encouraged me to touch, to taste, to explore without hesitation. I found myself laughing more than I had in months, tasting figs and strawberries, trying cheeses I wouldn't have dared to before. His presence was comforting, encouraging, yet never overbearing, a gentle reminder that it was okay to let go. By the afternoon, we had reached a small gallery tucked into a quiet street. Inside, light filtered through large windows, illuminating paintings of landscapes, portraits, and cityscapes that seemed to pulse with life. I lingered on a painting of a river at dusk, the sky ablaze with pink and gold. "It's beautiful," I whispered. "It is," he agreed. "But not as beautiful as what you notice when you take your time." His words lingered long after we left the gallery. There was something in the way he spoke, a patience and insight that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in years. As evening fell, we found a small bridge overlooking the Seine. The water mirrored the city lights, shimmering and dancing, creating a scene that felt almost magical. We leaned against the railing, quiet together, and watched boats glide beneath us. "I feel lighter," I admitted, surprising myself with the honesty of it. "Like I've been carrying weight I didn't even notice, and now it's starting to lift." He nodded. "Paris has a way of doing that. And sometimes, being with the right person does too." We walked back slowly, taking different streets, exploring corners I would have missed on my own. There was no hurry, no schedule, just the freedom to wander, to talk, to absorb everything around us. Back at the hotel, we sat by the window with wine, watching the night settle over the city. I realized how deeply this trip had changed me in such a short time. It wasn't about landmarks or photographs, it was about presence, about connection, about noticing the beauty in small moments and sharing them with someone who understood their value. When it was time to sleep, I felt a sense of gratitude that went beyond words. Gratitude for Paris, for the city's quiet enchantment, for the laughter and warmth that filled each day. But most of all, gratitude for him, for his patience, his care, and the subtle way he had opened my eyes to a world I had almost forgotten how to see. As I closed my eyes, I knew this trip would stay with me forever. Not because of the streets or the cafes or even the river, though all of those were magical, but because it had reminded me of something I had lost: the simple, profound joy of being fully alive, fully present, and fully seen. Paris had given me memories, yes, but it had also given me a gift far greater, the reminder that life, even after 40, 50, 60 years, still holds moments that can take your breath away. And that sometimes, it takes someone willing to walk beside you, quietly, attentively, to help you discover them again.